Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Read TFOS, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called Welcome Party, written by Lionheart. Just a quick little side note, I'm streaming every day at 9 a.m. GMT+1. I would love to see you all there. Anyways, on to the story. When humanity finally became a truly spacefaring race by testing our first FTL engine, nobody was there to greet us. There was not some grand meet-up between species. There wasn't even a radio signal to say, "Hi, we're your neighbors." The stars remained stubbornly silent, as they always had. At least, nobody was announcing their intentions to annihilate us. As we expanded, we found planets aplenty, from Mediterranean paradises to scorched hells, which not even Venus could hold a candle to. Gas giants with spectacular ring systems reminiscent of Saturn, pockmarked rocky planets with craters that could be seen from high orbit, even a few ashen wastelands orbiting stellar remnants, and a handful of strange planets orbiting neutron stars and black holes. We found examples of any type of planet that you could imagine, save the type with native, intelligent life. We looked at those cratered rocky planets and wondered in despair if maybe we had been too late. Maybe civilizations that arose but been wiped out through war or natural processes. Maybe humanity really was alone in the universe. And we shrieked into the void on every frequency, in every manner we could think of, for some response, any response. Again, the stars silently stared back with their cold, steady gazes, seemingly damning humanity to utter isolation. And it nearly broke us. And then, we found them. We found them on a super-Earth, surface gravity right around 4G, and honest to gods, all that is good in this universe, alien civilization. They were short to be expected from that kind of gravity, really, but they didn't have radio, which meant that they had electricity, which meant they had buildings, which meant they had the capacity to build cities. Their exact response when their radio communications were abruptly intruded upon by some weirdos in the sky speaking a wholly unknown language was sadly being lost to time, but it is pretty easy to imagine. After the initial panic groundside, we set our computers to build a common language. The computers did what they did best, sent a series of strings of zeros and ones out to be played with. Encoded in those strings was our base 10 numbering system. The computers waited patiently for a reply. The humans on board waited decidedly less patiently. 72 hours later, the reply came back. 35 strings of binary, one of the original strings followed by a new string, then another original, then another string, and so on. The linguistics descended upon the poor technician with the printout like a Black Friday shoppers moving towards the last hot new toy on the shelf. Apparently, these creatures utilized a base 25 numbering system. Odd, but not wholly unexpected. To cut a long story short, it was nearly 3 years before we finally managed to have an audio-only communication between diplomats. Both sides could understand. We didn't care. We weren't alone. They didn't care either. Their eyes had been opened to a whole new realm of existence. As we talked back and forth, an idea slowly revealed itself to us. Life was rare, like Gordon Ramsay admonishing an adult chef without using profanities. Rare. Turned out, there were a few qualifying factors needed to be met before life could even begin to think about taking hold. 1. Life, or at least advanced life, requires liquid water. This means that whatever the life is hosted on has to be near a long-term heat source, like, say, a star. 2. In order to be close enough to that star that liquid water can exist, the life's host celestial body has to be massive enough to actually hold on to that water, and additionally requires an atmosphere, lest the water simply boil away into the low pressure. Those kinds of masses only come with a fully fledged planet. 3. The planet also required a magnetic field long term, which also required the planet to have had a few too many Christmas cookies, so to speak. If the planet was too light, it would be too small. That close to a star tends to leave only the heavier elements, such as silicon, with only trace amounts of the lighter stuff like hydrogen, courtesy of solar winds. And the square cube law meant that the planet would lose too much heat too quickly. Its core would freeze solid, shutting off the magnetic field and allowing the solar wind to chip away at the atmosphere, losing the planet's water before life could ever really hope to take hold. These three tenets added up to a rather awful realization. Civilizations likely only had a prayer of developing on worlds where it would be economically infeasible to build a substantial number of rockets capable of putting satellites into stable orbit, let alone space stations, even if modular, or permanent off-world habitations. Earth, it seemed, was towards the lower edge of the weight class for habitable worlds, and these stout creatures, which, in a moment of humor and lacking any other equivalent word in our language, we'd come to call dwarves, were likely the norm. Likely, the dwarves didn't take too much offense to our name for them, at least not after we explained that a dwarf was simply a person who was abnormally short and or small by our possibly biased standards. Regardless, the dwarves had long ago realized the futility of visiting anywhere that wasn't ground, and they'd stopped trying. Funny thing is, with all that innovative energy no longer aimed at the skies, they turned to other scientific fields, and boy, did they have something to show us. Their material sciences made ours look childish, and they had something that, when translated into English, was known as carbon nanotube fiber rope. We got an idea. We asked the dwarves for a knowledge to create the CNFR, sharing our plan with them. After a whopping 5 seconds of contemplation, our computer began receiving data. Lots of data. All the data they had on how to create CNFR was gifted to us. In return, we transmitted the data all the way back to Earth, FTL communications having been cracked decades before FTL flight. A shipyard was commissioned, a special berth was constructed, and within our middle finger to all those millennia of isolation was constructed. It was, honestly, little more than a giant spool of CNFR with an FTL engine with some basic accommodations for crew. But far later than anyone would have liked, there were no construction delays or anything. We were just impatient. The ship was ready. In the intervening years, we'd been communicating with the dwarves, and had even snagged a few relatively close asteroids, stripping their minerals and building some nice communication satellites for them. The dwarves were ecstatic upon hearing that they'd be able to talk to dwarves on the other side of the planet without having to use their ingenious but clunky system of radio stations as relays, with every relay increasing the chance of introducing error. We'd given them television, and the first thing we'd both done is have the televised meeting. To our shock, they really did look a lot like us, only shorter. They had more hair, but their star was dimmer, and they were a little further towards the outer edge of the habitable zone. So their planet was a bit colder than Earth, so nothing nonsensical there. Turned out, what worked in one place tended to work everywhere, and despite it all, the humanoid form really is rather efficient for sapient beings. At long last, the spool ship arrived and maneuvered into position, just outside of geostationary orbit, and the spool started to unwind, its end slowly being pulled towards the surface of the dwarves' homeworld. It took several days, but at last the end made it down only a few centimeters off the dead center, and was immediately secured. The dwarves now had a space elevator. We could meet face to face. When the dwarf diplomat stepped off the elevator car into the cramped, for us, probably palatial for them, station, he was wearing a biological hazard suit, as were those of us lucky enough to be there. Just in case, you know. Eventually, the biologists would determine that while our biologies were in fact surprisingly similar, and pathogens probably could make out the leap, so too were our immune systems, and the latter would be sufficient to fight off each other's germs. That first, tearful hug between two friends was the first of many, as man and dwarf quickly found themselves fast friends. And so the two species went off to explore the galaxy, and along the way we found more life. Sadly, some of it had indeed fallen to catastrophe, leaving only ruins, and some were simply too xenophobic, but were happy to leave us alone if we returned the favor. Those systems are still marked as off-limits, but the vast majority seemed all too happy to join us, for they were just like the dwarves. They were friendly, but stranded on the bottom of the deep gravity well. As our collective grew, so did our knowledge base. As the knowledge base grew, our technology grew even more advanced, to the point where we could pinpoint an FTL engine on the other side of the galaxy in real time. Imagine our surprise when one day we got exactly such a signal from no known vessel. An uncontacted species, and one that had managed not only spaceflight but FTL flight, completely independently. We knew what we had to do. We scrambled. Diplomats were, in some cases, literally dragged out of bed, still half asleep and in their sleep attire. Ships were ready. 5 minutes later, our diplomatic fleet went screaming across the galaxy to this mysterious ship's projected exit point. We got there and into formation just 4 microseconds before the ship exited to real space. And we made damn sure this new species got an open-armed welcome we ourselves never did. End of story. I would just like to thank the T5 supporters: Bushmaster117, Caspar Arnholtz, Straxzoon WRE, Elijah Silvercross, Gray, John Carrington, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.